If someone had told me saying yes could be cheaper than staying where I was, I would have denied wanting out. The champagne was still chilled when Nora discovered the note. Her fingers trembled as she slid the folded paper from the bridal bouquet, her name scrawled in a rushed, slanted hand she knew far too well. Outside, the music drifted softly, violins and low piano, but inside the tiny dressing room of the Willow Crest Garden Chapel, everything went mute. She unfolded the page, throat already tight, stomach tipping in warning. "I'm sorry, Nora. I can't do this. I love you, but I can't marry you. Please don't hate me." That was all. No name, no explanation. Just those words from the woman she was supposed to marry in less than 20 minutes. Nora blinked once, twice. Her heart felt like it had cracked open, but no sound came out. Her white dress clung tightly to her ribs, suddenly suffocating. Around her, the flowers still glowed under the golden light. She heard her sister's voice outside calling her name. Guests already arriving, everything in motion. But her world had stopped. She had been left at the altar, abandoned, alone, without even the decency of a conversation. The tears didn't come at first. She was too stunned, too shattered. Her fingers crumpled the note before she realized she was doing it. She stood numb, her veil sliding off her hair onto the floor like silk smoke. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply walked out of the back door barefoot into the gravel of the garden path, past rows of white chairs and curious glances. She didn't owe anyone anything anymore. She passed her mother who gasped, her best friend, who called after her. "Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference." She didn't stop. She couldn't. 10 minutes later, she was sitting at the bar of a hotel 2 blocks from the chapel, still in her dress, barefoot, mascara smudged, ordering whiskey. "Make it a double," she said to the bartender, who blinked at her but said nothing. Another woman 2 seats down gave her a long look, elegant, dark-haired in a tailored black suit that contrasted sharply with Nora's torn dream of white. "Rough day?" the woman asked. Nora turned slowly. "I just got left at the altar." The woman blinked, then raised her glass. "To new beginnings, then." Nora almost laughed. "Almost. You're not going to say you're sorry?" The woman shrugged. "I don't offer pity, just company." Nora stared at her. She was striking in that dangerous way, sharp cheekbones, cool composure, a quiet confidence that didn't ask for permission. Nora took her drink. It burned going down, and she welcomed it. "What's her name?" she asked. The woman smiled slightly. "Mara. No last name." "Just that." Nora didn't push. "I'm Nora." "Nice to meet you, Nora. You have terrible taste in fiancés." Nora actually laughed this time. Bitterness and disbelief mixing in her chest. "Apparently, you want to get out of here?" Mara asked. Nora froze. "Excuse me. I'm serious. Come with me. Wherever you were supposed to be today is already over. Why not write a new page? You don't even know me. And you don't know me." Mara said, calm and steady, which makes it perfect. No expectations, no history. Just now, Nora stared at her glass. Then at the mirror behind the bar, at the reflection of a bride with nothing left to lose. "Are you serious?" she whispered. Mara nodded. "Deadly. You're insane." "Probably." Nora stood slowly. "Okay." Mara's brow lifted. "Really?" "Yes," Nora said. "Let's go." They walked out of the bar together. Nora still in her ruined wedding dress. Mara holding the door open like it was just another night. They ended up at a rooftop suite. Mara's sleek, minimal, quiet. Nora stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the city lights. "I feel like I'm going to fall apart." "Then do it," Mara said. "You're allowed." And Nora did. She cried like the world had cracked beneath her. And Mara didn't try to fix it. She simply sat near her. Let her break. Let her breath. The next morning, Nora woke in the guest bed, still in her dress, wrapped in a blanket. She didn't remember Mara giving her. Her head throbbed. Her heart ached, but she was still breathing. Mara was in the kitchen, calm as ever, making coffee. "You survived," she said simply. "Barely still counts." Nora looked at her. "Really?" "Looked? Why did you help me?" Mara sipped her coffee. "Because I've been broken before. And because you look like you might do something reckless if no one offered a different path. And if I still do? Nora asked. Mara smiled slightly. Then I'll just have to be more convincing. Convincing about what? That your story isn't over. Nora swallowed. Her heart was raw, but something sparked. Then prove it. Mara set down her coffee. Marry me. Nora blinked. What? You said you had nothing left to lose. So, let's rewrite the worst day of your life right here, right now. You're joking. I'm not. Nora stared at the woman who'd walked into her chaos without flinching. Why? Because you need a reason to believe in something again. Mara said, and I happen to have the means to give it to you. Nora whispered. Who are you? Mara just smiled. Say yes, and I'll tell you everything. And that was how Nora, the heartbroken waitress abandoned at the altar, found herself one signature away from marrying a stranger. A stranger who, unbeknownst to her, was a secretive and powerful millionaire CEO. But at that moment, all she saw was a chance to not feel empty, and she took it. Nora should have said no. Every cell in her body screamed it. Every rational thought echoing that this was reckless, absurd, out of character. But maybe that was the point. She was tired of being careful, of being the girl who got left behind. So when Mara slid the envelope across the table, simple, elegant, 2 blank lines for signatures. Nora didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen with fingers still trembling and signed her name next to Mara's. That was it. No ceremony, no flowers, no family, just 2 women in a rooftop suite bound now by a paper promise they didn't understand. So Mara said, folding the document and placing it back into a slim briefcase. We're married. Nora stared at her. You're serious? This is real. Very real, Mara replied. Cool and composed. Marriage license. Witnessed. Filed. And now what? Nora asked. Now, Mara said, pouring them each a glass of champagne like this was normal. We figure out who he just married. The first thing Nora noticed as the adrenaline faded was how little she actually knew about Mara. No job title. No family, no backstory, just sharp eyes, expensive taste. And an air of control that never cracked. Nora sipped her drink. Are you going to tell me who you really are now? Mara met her gaze. Mara Vallon. That's not a normal last name. It's not a normal life. Mara walked to the window, the skyline glowing behind her like a crown. I run a portfolio of companies, tech, real estate, media. I'm not in the news, but I'm behind a lot of what fuels it. Nora's mouth went dry. You're rich. Very. Like, how rich? Rich enough that I don't need anything from anyone, which is why this, she gestured to the envelope, isn't about gain. It's about choice. And you chose me, Nora said, stunned. Mara nodded. Because you weren't afraid to say yes when the world told you to fall apart. You don't even know me. That's the best part, Mara said. I didn't marry your past. I married your courage. Nora sat down slowly. Her heart thudded unevenly. This is insane. Yes, Mara said, and strangely beautiful. Over the next few days, the reality began to settle in. Nora didn't go home. Her phone buzzed with missed calls, texts from friends, family, coworkers. She ignored them all. She needed time, space, and Mara gave it to her. They lived in a strange rhythm. Quiet mornings with coffee, afternoons where Mara disappeared for meetings and Nora wandered the penthouse aimlessly, and evenings when they sat together over wine and silence. But something was shifting. Nora began asking questions. What's your favorite color? Gray, like storms. Do you always get what you want? Until now, yes. Why me? Because you looked like a beginning. Nora couldn't deny the pull. Mara was intoxicating, controlled, elegant. But it was the glimpses underneath that caught her off guard. The way Mara softened when she caught Nora staring. The way she always made sure there was tea ready when Nora couldn't sleep. The way she never touched without permission. On the 5th night, as rain slid down the windows and the city whispered beneath them, Mara made pasta and sat barefoot beside Nora on the couch. Tell me something true, she said. Nora hesitated. I used to dream about running away. Not from a wedding, just everything. Did it feel like this? No, Nora said. This feels real. Mara's voice lowered. It is. They didn't kiss, not that night, but Nora thought about it a lot. She went to bed wrapped in a stranger's last name, trying to understand the new rhythm of her own heartbeat. The next morning, a courier arrived, a small box. Nora opened it to find a key card, a set of new credit cards with her name and Mara's surname, and a note written in Mara's clean, deliberate handwriting. If you're going to be my wife, you need to live like you belong here. No expectations, just the option to choose. Nora stared at the note for a long time, then at the cards, then at her own reflection. For the first time in days, she picked up her phone and called her mother. "Hi," she said. "I'm okay. No, I'm not coming home. I'm figuring things out." She didn't mention Mara. Not yet. That was hers. That night, she cooked dinner for Mara. Badly, awkwardly, the pasta overcooked and the sauce too salty. But Mara smiled like it was perfect. And for the first time, Nora saw her laugh. Really laugh. "You're terrible at this," Mara teased. "I know," Nora groaned. "But you're here. That counts for everything." "It shouldn't." "It does to me." And then without planning it, Nora kissed her. It wasn't soft. It was full of fear, of longing, of a woman trying to find a way back to herself. Mara didn't move for a heartbeat. Then she kissed her back slow and steady like she'd been waiting since the moment Nora walked into that bar. When they pulled apart, breathless, Mara whispered, "Now what?" Nora answered, "Now we see what happens when a broken girl marries a woman who doesn't know how to lose." And Mara smiled like that was exactly what she'd hoped for. The kiss didn't fix anything. It didn't magically erase the betrayal still bleeding in Nora's chest or give her clarity about what this marriage even was. But it changed something. It cracked the ice. It invited warmth. The next morning, Mara was already dressed when Nora came into the kitchen. Coffee brewing. The city waking slowly behind the tall windows. Mara looked up from her tablet, her expression unreadable as always, but her eyes softened slightly. "Sleep well?" "Kind of," Nora said, walking barefoot across the polished floors. "I don't sleep much because of work? Because of habit?" Nora leaned on the counter, studying her. "You don't let a lot of people in, do you?" Mara paused. "No, but you let me marry you." "I told you," Mara said, sipping her coffee. "You were brave when most people would have broken. I admire that." "Admire," Nora repeated. "Is that what this is?" Mara turned to her fully. "Do you want it to be something else?" Nora didn't answer. She didn't know. Not yet. That afternoon, Mara invited her to the office. "You don't have to," she said. "But if you want to see who I really am when I'm not pretending to be the woman who makes breakfast, I'll show you." Nora agreed. Part curiosity, part challenge. Mara sent a car, a black town car with tinted windows and a driver who addressed Nora as Mrs. Vallon, which sent a chill down her spine. The building was sleek glass and steel towering over the city like a monument to ambition. Nora stepped into the private elevator, heart hammering, wearing jeans and a borrowed blazer, out of place, but refusing to show it. Mara met her on the top floor. The shift was immediate. The barefoot woman who sipped wine was gone. This Mara was armored in a razor-sharp black suit, hair pinned back, voice smooth and definitive. People parted when she walked. From a few steps behind, Nora watched Mara steer meetings, make million-dollar calls in seconds, and deliver orders with a queen's grace and a weapon's precision. It was intoxicating. Terrifying. Beautiful. During a break, Mara leaned close. "Still think I'm a little insane?" "No," Nora said, dazed. "Now I think you might be a little dangerous, to everyone but you." Nora's breath caught. Later, they stood at the windows, the city spread below. "You don't belong here," Mara said, gentle despite the words. "Not because you can't do it, but because this place grinds down softness. I don't want that for you." "What if I want to belong here, with you?" Mara looked at her, really looked. "Then we make a place that doesn't ask you to change." They went home in quiet. That night, Mara opened the door to her world a little wider. They sat on the floor again, lights low, Mara's hair finally down. "My mother taught me never to need anyone," she said. "I listened too well." "You think needing someone makes you weak?" "I used to." Mara met her eyes. "Now I think it makes you human." Nora touched her hand. "Then be human with me." "I'm trying," Mara whispered. In the weeks that followed, a kind of rhythm formed. Nora still hadn't returned to her apartment. She hadn't called her ex. She didn't want to. That life felt like a dream she had already woken from. Now she lived in Mara's orbit, part fantasy, part flame. She wandered the city by day, galleries, bookstores, coffee shops, but every night she came back to Mara. And Mara was there, present, observant, softening. One evening, a little wine loose, Nora asked, "What do people think you're like?" "Unapproachable. Cold. Ruthless. And what are you really?" Mara didn't answer. Nora leaned in and murmured, "You're afraid." Mara's eyes darkened. Of what? Of being known. They didn't kiss, and didn't need to. The closeness was already louder than touch. Then came the gala, one of Mara's obligations, fundraising, PR, power plays. She asked Nora to come as her wife, not a plus one, her equal. Nora said yes, though her stomach tightened. "It's just a party," Mara said. "Not to me." "Then I'll be with you every second," Mara promised. "I won't leave your side." The night hit like a storm, black dresses, flashing cameras, whispered names. Mara looked breathtaking. So did Nora. And yet the moment they entered the room, Nora felt every eye on them. Some curious, some judging, some disbelieving. "They don't know you," Mara murmured. "But they will." Throughout the evening, Mara stayed close, hand on the small of Nora's back. Warm glances whispered reassurances. But as the hours passed, Nora heard the murmurs. "That's the new wife, a waitress? Seriously? She must be a temporary distraction." Nora tried to brush it off, but the shame built slowly, tightening around her throat. Mara noticed. "Come with me," she said, pulling her toward the terrace. Alone under the city lights, Mara turned to her. "Say it." "Say what?" "What you're thinking. That I don't belong here? That I'm just a girl who got dumped and ran into your life like some stray? Is that what you think I see when I look at you?" Mara asked, voice hard. "You married me on a whim." "No, I saw you drowning and I knew what that looked like because I drowned before, too." "You didn't ask for saving, Nora. You asked for something real and I gave it to you. But if you want to walk away now, I don't." Mara stepped closer. "Then stop apologizing for being loved by me." Nora's breath shook. "And if I fall in love with you," Mara's voice dropped. "Then I'll catch you." It started with the smallest things. A touch lingering just a breath too long. A look held across the room like a secret only they could understand. Nora began to notice how Mara's gaze would drop to her lips mid-con conversation. How her fingers would graze Nora's lower back when guiding her through a crowd. Nothing overt. Nothing spoken, but it burned. It built. It waited for something to give. And it did. 2 nights after the gala. Nora had just come out of the shower, hair damp, wearing one of Mara's silk robes she'd found in the closet. She wasn't trying to be seductive. She was tired, loose, finally breathing again after days of pressure. Mara was standing by the kitchen island, still in her suit, sipping wine and watching her like she was trying to memorize her every line. Nora stopped in the doorway. "What?" Mara didn't blink. "You look like a dream I haven't had yet," Nora's heart stuttered. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," Mara murmured. "Then why say it?" "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't want you." The room shifted. The air thickened. Nora walked closer. Step by step until only inches remained, then stopped pretending. Mara's mouth found hers like a promise breaking open. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't cautious. It was hunger wrapped in restraint, desire built from days of silence and patience, snapping all at once. Nora kissed her back with equal urgency, fingers twisting in Mara's jacket, pulling her close until there was nothing between them but heat. Mara pressed her against the counter. Her hands on Nora's waist, mouth tasting her like she had no intention of forgetting the moment. Nora moaned softly against her lips, and Mara stilled. "Tell me to stop," she whispered. "Why?" "Because if I don't, I won't be able to." Nora's voice was, "Don't stop." And she didn't. That night, Mara undressed her like worship. Every movement slow and reverent. Eyes dark with longing, but full of control. She didn't rush. She didn't take. She gave. Her hands traced every inch of Nora's skin like she was relearning the world through touch. And when they finally moved together, bodies tangled, breaths shared, hearts racing, Nora felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. Seen, wanted without condition. After they lay in silence, Nora's head rested on Mara's chest. The steady thump of her heart grounding her in the dark. "Was that?" Nora began. "Real?" Mara finished. "Yes. This wasn't part of the plan," Nora whispered. "I didn't have a plan," Mara said. "I just had you." Nora closed her eyes. "What happens now?" whatever we want. But the next morning brought reminders that the world still existed beyond their bubble. Nora's phone buzzed relentlessly. She finally picked up a call from her best friend, Danny, who nearly screamed through the speaker. "Where the hell have you been? Are you okay? Do you need me to come get you?" "I'm fine," Nora said quietly. "You vanished. You ghosted everyone. I thought you were dead in a ditch." "I'm not." "Then where are you?" Nora hesitated, then said, "I'm with someone." Someone Di's tone turned sharp. "You mean a rebound?" "Nora, you were just left at the altar." "I know. And you just ran off with a stranger." "She's not a stranger anymore." "Nora said she married me." Silence. Heavy. "You're not serious." "I am." "Oh my God. Nora, what the hell are you doing?" "Living." Nora's voice was firm. "For the first time in years, I'm doing something for myself." Danny didn't understand. How could she? Nora ended the call gently, but firmly. Mara, listening from the next room, didn't say anything. Just walked over and handed her coffee. "You okay?" "Not really." "Do you want to be?" "I want to not care what people think." Mara smiled slightly. "Then start with me." That day, Mara invited Nora to a private dinner with one of her board members. Nora hesitated. "Are you sure? You're my wife." "On paper." Mara touched her cheek. "Not just on paper." The dinner was at a rooftop restaurant closed to the public. Luxury on every surface. Nora wore a black dress Mara had gifted her. Simple, elegant, and surprisingly her. She felt nervous, out of place. But Mara held her hand under the table, grounding her with every glance. The board member, a woman named Sabine, was sharp and poised, but warm. She studied Nora for a long moment, then said, "You're not what I expected." "What were you expecting?" Nora asked. "Someone trying to play a game. But you don't know the rules yet. That makes you dangerous." "I'm not trying to be dangerous." "No," Sabine said. "But love always is." After the dinner, as they rode back in the town car, Nora turned to Mara. "Is that what this is? Love?" Mara didn't answer immediately. She reached for Nora's hand instead. "It's becoming," she said. "And I don't want to stop it." Nora leaned her head on Mara's shoulder, heart tight with something terrifying and beautiful. "Me neither." But as the car turned the final corner, a flash of movement outside caught Nora's eye. A figure on the sidewalk. Familiar? Too familiar? Her breath hitched. Mara noticed. "What is it?" Nora didn't answer because she wasn't sure. But in her chest, something cold bloomed because the person she thought she'd left behind might not be gone after all. Nora didn't sleep that night. Not really. Her body lay curled against Mara's, warm and safe under the blankets. But her mind was elsewhere, locked on that single, fleeting glimpse of the figure outside the car. She'd only seen the profile, but something in her gut twisted instantly. Familiar posture, familiar haircut. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, a trick of the streetlights. But the memory clung to her ribs like wet fabric. Mara stirred beside her just before dawn, brushing a lazy kiss to Nora's bare shoulder. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Nora didn't lie. "I thought I saw someone." Mara propped herself up on one elbow. "Someone you know?" Nora hesitated. "Then my ex?" Mara's body tensed almost imperceptibly. "The one who left you at the altar." "Yeah." Silence. Then Mara asked, voice low. "Do you want to see her?" "No." "Do you want to talk to her?" "No." Nora said again firmer. "I just didn't expect her to be here. It threw me." Mara nodded once, then said nothing more. She didn't push, didn't pry, just placed a gentle kiss behind Nora's ear and whispered, "She doesn't get to follow you here." But it wasn't that simple. That day Nora stepped outside alone for the first time in a while, walking to a bookstore down the block, craving a sliver of normally. And there, standing just across the street, was her Tessa, shorter than she remembered. Same piercing gaze, same self-righteous posture. "Nora," Tessa called out. Nora froze. Every muscle screamed, "Run." But she didn't. Instead, she turned slowly, heart hammering. "What are you doing here?" Tessa crossed the street with far too much confidence for someone who destroyed her. "I've been looking for you." "Why?" "Because I made a mistake." Nora laughed once, sharp. "You think that's what this was?" "A mistake." I panicked. "Okay. I was scared of marrying me, of not being ready, of doing it for the wrong reasons. And now you think you are? Nora's voice was ice. Now that I've moved on, now that I found someone who actually wants me, Tessa faltered. This person you married, it's insane, Nora. So was loving you. Tessa's expression flickered just for a second. You don't even know her. And you didn't know what love meant. You were supposed to be mine. I was never yours. Nora snapped. You left me an address, holding my future in my hands while you ran. Because I couldn't give you what you wanted. I didn't want perfection, Nora said. I wanted honesty. I wanted someone who would choose me every day, even when it's messy, and I found that in Mara. Tessa's mouth twisted. She's using you. You don't even know her. Neither do you. I know enough, Nora said, her voice trembling with rage. I know she never looked at me like I was something she regretted. I know she stayed when I cried, when I panicked, when I didn't have the words. I know she didn't leave. Tessa stepped closer. I still love you. No, Nora said. You love the idea of me, but I'm not yours anymore, and you don't get to come back just because I finally found peace. She turned and walked away, ignoring the way Tessa called her name again. That night, Nora didn't tell Mara what happened. Not at first. They had dinner quiet sweet. Mara poured wine, made her favorite pasta again. But Mara knew something was off. She always knew. Tell me, she said softly as they curled up on the couch. Nora took a breath. I saw her. I talked to her. Mara didn't move, didn't flinch, and she wants me back. A long pause. Mara's voice was even. Do you want her back? No, then it's not a threat, but it still shook me. That's allowed. Nora stared at her. You're not mad. Mara gave a soft smile. I don't own you, Nora. You're not a thing to be stolen. If you're here, it's because you choose to be. I do, Nora whispered. I choose you. Mara leaned in forehead to forehead. Then let the past stay where it belongs. Nora wanted to believe it was that simple. But a week later, she received a letter at the penthouse. No return address. Her name written in handwriting she knew far too well. Inside a photo of her and Mara at the gala. Grainy. Taken from a distance. And on the back, just 5 words. You don't know her yet. Nora's fingers trembled. She showed it to Mara. Mara read it. Unreadable as always. Do you know who sent it? She asked. Tessa has to be. Mara nodded once. Then gently took the photo and set it on fire in a crystal ashtray. Then let her burn. Nora watched the image curl into ash. But the words still burned in her mind. You don't know her yet. And for the first time since they met, she wondered, what if that was true? The photo burned to ash, but the words stayed. Nora tried to shake them to press back the rising tide of doubt, but they haunted her in quiet moments. When Mara left for work and didn't say where calls came in from numbers, Mara never explained. When the door to her home office was always locked, you don't know her yet. Nora didn't want to believe it. She loved Mara or she was dangerously close. But love didn't erase questions. It only made them heavier. Mara noticed the shift. She was too perceptive not to. You've been quiet, she said one evening over dinner. Just tired, Nora replied. Mara raised an eyebrow. From what? Thinking about me about all of this? Mara set down her fork. Do you regret it? Nora shook her head slowly. No, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't confused. By me? It wasn't a question. Nora hesitated. You're a fortress, Mara. And I didn't notice it at first because I was too busy being rescued. But now I'm starting to wonder if you built those walls to keep people out or to keep something in. Silence stretched between them. Then Mara stood. Come with me. Nora followed her to the elevator. Mara typed a code she'd never used before. They descended deeper than Nora knew the building even went. Subless, hidden floors. The elevator opened to a private wing, glass, steel, shadows. Mara walked ahead without speaking, heels echoing in the silence. Nora followed, heart pounding. Finally, Mara stopped at a heavy black door, scanned her fingerprint, and stepped aside. This is where I keep the parts of me no one sees. Nora stepped inside. It wasn't sinister. It was a vault of truth. Screens lined the walls. Live feeds from buildings, cities, offices, files stacked neatly. A table with blueprints, contracts, plans. You run surveillance? Nora asked carefully. I run security for my companies, for my name, for people I care about. So you've been followed since the moment you became mine. Mara said simply, for your safety? Nora's breath caught. That's why the photo didn't surprise you. Because I already knew Tessa was near. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to see if you'd come to me. If you trusted me. You tested me. Mara's gaze didn't waver. Would you rather I lied? Nora's voice broke. I'd rather you treated me like a partner, not a problem to manage. Mara stepped forward. You weren't a problem. You were a storm. And I built a place where you could land. But yes, I should have told you. I just didn't know how. You know everything else except how to love someone like you. That hit hard. Mara's voice dropped. You make me want to be softer. And I don't know how to be soft without breaking. Nora reached for her hand, then break with me. And Mara let her. That night for the first time, Mara didn't lead, didn't control. She simply held. They made love like it was a conversation. Slow, searching, filled with unspoken apologies. And when Nora cried after, not from sadness, but from relief, Mara kissed the tears and didn't run. The next morning, Mara gave her full access to the office, her passwords, her files, her calendar. No more locked doors, she said, and she meant it. But the peace didn't last. That same afternoon, while Mara was at a board meeting, Nora received a second envelope, no name. Inside, a photo of Mara, younger, with a woman Nora didn't recognize, beautiful, blonde, laughing, and on the back, asked her what happened to her. Nora's hands trembled. She stared at the photo until the edges blurred. That night, Mara came home late, exhausted. Her eyes lit up when she saw Nora, but Nora didn't smile. She held up the photo. Who is she? Mara stilled. A full heartbeat passed before she spoke. Her name was Elise. Was yes. What happened to her? Mara closed her eyes. She died 3 years ago. How? Car accident. And you? I was supposed to be in the car. Nora sat down. Mara remained standing. She was the first woman I ever loved. We were reckless, passionate. We fought like fire. I told her I couldn't keep doing it. Couldn't live inside chaos. She left angry. Got in the car. That was the last time I saw her alive. You blamed yourself. I still do. Nora's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to see me as broken. You are broken. Nora said gently. So am I. That's why we fit. Mara sat beside her. Finally. Someone is trying to turn you against me. I know. And you're still here. Of course I am. Why? Because loving someone doesn't mean trusting their perfection. Nora whispered. It means choosing them even when the cracks show. Mara's voice was raw. And you choose me? Yes, Nora said. But I need you to start choosing me back. Not just protecting me, choosing me. Mara nodded. Then I will. They stayed like that, forehead to forehead, pain stitched between them, but no longer hidden. But outside, someone watched from a distance. The photos weren't done. The past wasn't buried. And Nora wasn't the only one who'd lost something worth destroying. The morning after Mara's confession, something in Nora shifted. She no longer saw Mara as untouchable, perfect, or invulnerable. She saw the fracture lines, the soft underbelly beneath the armor. And strangely, it made her feel safer, like she finally had something real to hold on to. But reality didn't wait. By the time Mara left for her morning meetings, another envelope had arrived. This one wasn't subtle. A flash drive. No name, no message, just a single black USB in a plain gray envelope left at the front desk of the building addressed simply to Mrs. Vallon. Nora stared at it for a long time. Every instinct screamed not to open it, but curiosity was heavier than fear. She plugged it into the office computer. One folder, one video. She clicked. It was grainy security footage from 4 years ago. A dim corridor. A woman, Elise, storming out of a building, tears on her face. Behind her, Mara followed. The angle was wide, distant, but the voices carried just enough. I can't keep doing this, Mara. Elise's voice, sharp and broken. Then don't, Mara snapped. If you need to go, go. You'll regret this. Maybe, but not more than I'll regret staying with someone who only knows how to hurt me. The sound cut off there. The video ended. Nora sat frozen. The date stamped on the footage 2 hours before Elise's car crash. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The door opened behind her. You opened it, Mara said quietly. Nora didn't turn. I had to. And now you've seen the worst of me. No, Nora said, standing slowly. Now I've seen the most human part of you. Mara's expression didn't break, but something in her eyes flickered. Someone wants to make you doubt me. I don't need a video to remind me that people say things they regret. You believe me? I believe you feel guilt and that means you cared. That's enough for me. Mara exhaled slowly like she'd been holding her breath since the moment she walked in. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, but you've got me anyway. That night, they didn't speak about Elise, or the video, or the threats. They just were, two women, breath-warm and sweat-slick, tangled in sheets, soft sighs and quiet names. Mara touched Nora like she feared she might vanish. Nora kissed Mara like she meant to mark every inch as hers. Afterward, in the hush, Nora breathed, "Someone's watching us." Mara nodded against her shoulder. "I know. What are you going to do?" "What I always do," Mara murmured. "Control the narrative." By morning, it was already out of their hands. Headlines erupted across finance blogs and gossip rags. Mara Vallen's secret wife. Who is the unknown woman behind the empire? Photos of Nora at the gala, at the office, on the street. A grainy balcony kiss. Nora's full name, her work history, the cancelled wedding, everything. Mara slammed her tablet down, fury barely contained. They outed you. Nora sat at the breakfast table, bloodless. They destroyed me. I'll handle it. You can't erase the internet. I can bury it. But Nora didn't want to disappear. She wanted to rage. You said you'd protect me. And I will. Then why do I feel like I'm suffocating inside your life? Mara stepped closer. Everyone thinks I'm some opportunist who married rich after being dumped, Nora said. You know that isn't true, don't you? The question hung there, raw and ugly. Mara didn't flinch. Yes. Nora's voice cracked. Then tell the world. What do you mean? Tell them the truth. That we're married. That it was my choice. That this isn't a game. Mara hesitated. You want to go public? I want to stop hiding. It'll paint a target on you. It's already there, Nora said. At least let me choose how I carry it. That afternoon, Mara called a press conference. PR panicked. The board tried to shut it down. Mara ignored them all. At the podium, with Nora beside her, she said, "This is my wife. Her name is Nora. She isn't a scandal or a weakness. She's the strongest person I know. If you have questions, bring them to me, not her." The room detonated, cameras, flashes, shouting. Nora laced her fingers with Mara's and, for the first time, didn't feel like a shadow behind a giant. She felt like someone standing in the light beside her. That night, social media raged, support, hate, curiosity churning in equal measure. Through it all, Mara stayed near. You still okay? She asked. I'm exhausted, Nora said, but yes. I believe in us more than ever. Then, just as the dust began to settle, Nora's phone buzzed. Unknown number. One photo. One line. The image, Mara in a club, intimate lighting, a woman on her lap, mouth at her neck. Timestamp, 7 months ago, before Nora. The message, you're not her first mistake. Nora stared, stomach twisting. She turned the screen toward Mara, who sat brushing her hair at the edge of the bed. Who is she? Mara looked over, saw the photo, and for the first time since they met, her composure broke. She was someone I should never have touched. Nora said nothing. Hint. Mara stood. Let me explain. Then start talking, Nora said. Because I need to know who I married before someone else tells me for you. For the first time, Mara looked afraid, not furious, not cold, not in control, just human, unmasked. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Nora waited, silent, heart pounding like it already knew the answer would hurt. Her name was Serena. Mara finally said, voice low. She was a distraction and a mistake. When Nora's voice was steady, colder than she meant. Last winter. Before you, long before any of this. And what was she to you? Mara hesitated. A way to feel something. After Elise, I was numb for a long time. Serena was fire, fast, addictive, but not love. Never love. Then what was she doing straddling you in a club? Mara flinched. I was reckless. I didn't care who saw. I didn't care about anyone. Not then. But she cared about you clearly enough to send this now. Mara's jaw tightened. She was possessive, controlling. When I ended it, she didn't take it well. Did she know you were married? She does now. Nora stepped back. So, this isn't about me. It's about her being angry you moved on. Yes, Mara said, but it's also about someone helping her. Tessa or someone Tessa hired. She doesn't have the reach to dig this deep alone. Nora's thought spun. So now I'm in the middle of both of your exes playing chess with our lives. You're not a pawn, Mara said fiercely. You're everything. That's why they're trying to scare you. It's working. Mara stepped forward. Then let me fix this. No, Nora said. You don't get to fix me. Not this time. You get to stand still, open your mouth, and tell me everything. All of it. No more controlled statements. No more curated truths. Mara breathed deeply. Fine. You want the truth? I built this empire because I was tired of begging men in boardrooms to take me seriously. I built it like a fortress because I thought if I had power, I'd be untouchable. I dated Elise because she made me feel alive. And I lost her because I let my pride win. I slept with Serena because I was hollow and needed to feel something, anything. And when I tried to end it, she made my life hell for 6 months. I have secrets, Nora. So many. I've done things I'm not proud of, but I never lied to you. And I never touched you with hands still meant for someone else. Nora's throat tightened. Then why does it feel like I'm always chasing the version of you that's real? Because I'm still learning how to show her. Mara said, You think I don't feel fear when I look at you? You terrify me. You see straight through me. And one day I know you'll realize you deserve better than a woman who builds walls for a living. Then stop waiting for me to run, Nora said. Start giving me reasons to stay. And Mara did something then that she never did in front of anyone, she cried. Just one tear, silent, controlled. But it cracked her armor in half. I don't know how to be loved by someone like you, she whispered. Then learn, Nora said, stepping into her arms. Because I'm not going anywhere. They stood like that, bodies pressed together, hearts beating in imperfect harmony. Later that night, Nora sat alone on the balcony staring at the city. She didn't hear Mara come out until the woman wrapped a soft blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her. There's something else, Mara said. Nora turned. Please don't say that. It's not about me. It's about you. What do you mean? Mara pulled out her tablet, swiped, and showed Nora a file. One of my people traced the source of the leaked photo and the email that sent it. Nora read the screen. Her stomach dropped. That's my old coworker. The one from the diner. Yeah, Danny. Mara nodded slowly. She was paid. Not by Serena. Not by Tessa. By someone else. Who? We don't know yet. But the payment trail started just after our wedding. She was watching me and feeding information to someone who wants to break us. Nora leaned back in shock. I trusted her. I know. She called me when I disappeared. She pretended to be worried because she needed to keep tabs on you. Nora's blood ran cold. This is bigger than your ex or mine. It's calculated, strategic. But why? I'm no one. Mara turned to her, gazed serious. Not anymore. Nora swallowed. So, what do? We find out who's behind it and then we burn them down together. Nora gave a shaky laugh together. Every step, Mara said, no more secrets. No more locked doors. Then let me help. I'm not a victim, Mara. I'm your wife. Mara kissed her slow and sure. Then, let's start acting like it. The next day, they met with Mara's private investigator. Nora asked the questions. She read the files. She dug into timelines. And as she did, she began to see the pattern. Every leak, every photo, every whisper. It all led to one shadowed figure. A shell company, anonymous emails, an address in another city. Someone's pulling strings, Nora said. Someone with money access patience. Mara nodded, which means we're close. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at Mara beside her. So many versions of this woman existed. The CEO, the ex, the wife, the survivor, the protector, the sinner. And she loved all of them. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. Trust had to be rebuilt together, layer by layer. In the morning, Nora looked Mara in the eyes and said, Let's find out who's trying to destroy us, and when we do, don't hold back. Mara's smile was slow and dangerous. I never do. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Nora wasn't the same woman who'd walked barefoot into Mara's penthouse weeks ago with tear-streaked cheeks and a broken heart. That girl had been shattered. This one was sharpening. She sat across from Mara's lead investigator, eyes narrowed, hands steady, reading through encrypted messages and tracing payment paths like she'd been born for it. Mara watched her with a mixture of awe and something deeper. Pride maybe, or reverence. "You're dangerous when you're focused," Mara murmured as they pored over evidence late one night. "I learned from the best," Nora replied without looking up. "You learned fast. Pain teaches faster than power." Mara reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I hate that it had to teach you at all." "Don't," Nora said. "Don't pity me. I'm not broken anymore." "No," Mara whispered. "You're not." They stayed up all night chasing a name. The shell company traced to a lawyer in Montreal, but the accounts behind it bounced across Europe, cloaked in offshore havens and fake identities. But then something cracked. A single slip-up in a metadata tag from an email. A location. Chicago. A name. C. Deo. Nora sat upright. Serena. Mara's jaw clenched. She's back in the country and playing puppet master. But the pieces still didn't fit. Serena didn't have that kind of access, that level of coordination. She was a disruptor. Yes, but this was calculated. Surgical professional. She's not working alone. Mara said she doesn't have the resources to pull this off. Then who does? Someone with power and motive. Nora stared at the wall. Mind racing. Who benefits from our destruction? Tessa doesn't have the money. You're bored. Mara frowned. They're angry about the marriage, but this is too extreme. What about your family? The silence that followed was telling. Mara. My family doesn't talk to me, Mara said carefully. They cut ties years ago. That doesn't mean they aren't watching. Mara's expression darkened. My father hated that I took the Valen name and turned it into something mine. He said I disgraced the legacy. That I would ruin everything the men built. You think he's involved? If he found out I married a woman with no pedigree and gave her access to everything? Yes. He'd destroy us just to prove he could. And Serena, a useful weapon in his hands. Then we find him. Mara nodded. We'll go to Chicago quietly. And Serena, leave her to me. Nora's eyes flashed. No, I want to face her. Nora, I need to look her in the eye and let her see that I'm not afraid of her. Not anymore. Mara didn't argue. She just touched Nora's cheek and whispered. Then we do it together. They left that night. No security team, no staff, just two women in dark coats, hearts burning with fury and love, flying into the eye of the storm. Chicago was colder than Nora remembered. Gritty gray. They stayed in a discreet hotel under aliases. The PI had already located the last confirmed address for Serena. Nora stared at the building from the passenger seat of a rented black SUV. You ready for this? Mara asked. No, Nora said. But I'm going anyway. The apartment was upscale, sterile. Serena opened the door without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting for them. Took you long enough, she said, smirking. Nora's stomach turned, but she didn't flinch. Mara's voice was ice. You've been busy. I like chaos, Serena said, eyes gleaming. But I love revenge. Against who? Nora snapped. Me? Mara. You took something from me, Serena said, stepping back to let them in. She was never yours, Nora said. She was never anyone's, Serena hissed. That was the problem. Mara stepped between them. Why now? Why this? Serena shrugged. Because you didn't just leave me, Mara. You erased me. Rewrote the story so I was nothing, and then you replaced me with some broken little waitress who doesn't know the first thing about surviving in your world. She knows more than you ever did, Mara said. She has heart. Serena laughed, bitter. And that'll get her killed. Who are you working with? Nora demanded. Your father. Serena tilted her head. Interesting guess. You don't have the reach to do this alone. No, Serena said, but he needed someone who knew you, who could hit where it hurt. What did he promise you? Mara asked. Money. No, Serena said, smiling. A front row seat to your downfall. Mara moved forward, but Nora grabbed her hand. Don't. She wants that. You should be careful, Serena said sweetly. You don't know what you're sleeping next to. I know exactly who she is, Nora snapped. And she's mine. They left before things exploded. Back in the car, Mara's hands trembled on the steering wheel. We have confirmation, Nora said. Your father's behind it. He's using her, which means we go to him next. Mara hesitated. Nora, if we do this, it won't be clean. It won't be safe. Nothing about loving you has been safe. I don't care. Mara turned to her and for a moment her eyes were glassy. You're braver than anyone I've ever known. I'm just done running, Nora said. Let's end this. That night, they didn't talk. They just held each other like soldiers before battle, lips pressed in silence, hands clinging like lifelines. And when they finally slept, it was dreamless. Tomorrow they would confront the man who raised Mara and either burn his world down or be buried beneath it. The Vallon estate didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress, high walls, steel gates, security cameras, perfectly trimmed hedges guarding a legacy built on control and silence. Nora sat in the passenger seat, her stomach coiled tight. Mara hadn't spoken since they left the hotel. She drove like a machine, efficient, precise, calm in a way that wasn't calm at all. When they reached the gate, the guard stepped forward to block them, but paused when he saw Mara's face. A moment passed. Then he tapped his radio, and the gates opened slowly. They're expecting us? Nora asked. Mara didn't look at her. He always expects me, even when he pretends he doesn't. The car wound up a long gravel driveway flanked by old oak trees. The mansion loomed at the top, grand, cold, untouched by time or compassion. Nora stepped out into the chill air, her coat pulled tight around her, but the real cold came from inside. Mara led the way. Inside, everything smelled like old money and older resentment. Marble floors, oil paintings, crystal chandeliers. A maid tried to greet them, but Mara brushed past her without a glance. He'll be in the study. You sure? Nora asked. He's a creature of habit, Mara said. He only ever leaves that room to control something or someone. The door to the study was made of solid mahogany. Mara didn't knock. She pushed it open. Her father looked up from behind a massive oak desk. He hadn't aged much. Still silver-haired, immaculately dressed, expression carved from stone. Ah, he said. The prodigal daughter returns. Cut the theatrics, Mara said. We both know why I'm here. And who's this? He asked, glancing at Nora with a flicker of disdain. The waitress? My wife, Mara said evenly. Of course. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. She fits the pattern. I'll give you that. Nora stepped forward. We know what you've done. You'll have to be more specific, he said smoothly. Threats, blackmail, hiring Serena to sabotage your own daughter. Serena came to me, he said. All fire and vengeance. It was quite poetic. I simply gave her a direction. You gave her money, Mara snapped. And resources. I invested in a necessary correction. Of what? Nora demanded of her success. Of her life, of her delusion, he said coldly. She thinks this empire is hers. She thinks she earned it. She forgets whose name she wears. Mara's hands clenched into fists. I earned everything. You gave me nothing. I gave you life. I gave you legacy. You gave me scars, Mara hissed. And the need to prove you wrong. And yet here you are married to a woman who doesn't belong in boardrooms, who's dragging your name through the tabloids. Who? Stop. Mara said, voice like steel. You don't get to touch her. Not even with your words. You are supposed to marry power, he said. Merge empires, build alliances, not chase wounded strays and hand them the keys to the castle. She didn't ask for keys, Mara said. She asked for me. And what did you give her in return? Surveillance, secrets, a war she didn't start. Nora stepped forward. No, she gave me something none of you ever did. Truth. Even when it hurt. He smiled faintly. Truth is a luxury, one you can't afford when the world is watching. The world is watching, Mara said. And you've exposed yourself. We trace the payments. We have the emails. The shell companies, the connections. So, what will you do? Destroy me? No. Mara said, I'm going to expose you to who? The board? The media? He laughed. They won't believe you. They don't want the truth. They want returns. Then I'll give them a story they can't ignore. Mara said, every dirty deal, every coercion, every illegal transaction that would burn everything down. Then let it burn, she said. I'll rebuild it without your name. And your wife? He asked, turning to Nora. She's your weakness. No, Mara said. She's the reason I finally stopped being yours. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Mara stepped forward and placed a thick manila envelope on his desk. All the proof, all the evidence. We're going public in 48 hours unless you resign from every board. Remove yourself from every Valen holding and vanish. You're bluffing. Am I? Mara asked. Do you want to find out what happens when the little girl you tried to bury grows up with teeth? He didn't speak, just stared at her. Then finally, he smiled cold and slow. You always were your mother's daughter. You should have remembered that before you tried to break me. Mara turned, took Nora's hand, walked out. They didn't look back. Outside, the cold bit hard, but the air tasted cleaner. They didn't speak until they were back in the car. Then Mara looked at her. You okay? No, Nora said. But I'm proud of you. He'll retaliate. Then we retaliate harder. Mara's lips curved. God, I love you. Say it again. I love you. Good. Nora said, because I'm not done fighting for you. That night, back in the hotel, they didn't touch each other with urgency. They touched each other with purpose. Slow, intentional. A promise sealed in skin. And when Mara whispered, mine against Nora's neck. Nora whispered. Always right back. Tomorrow they'd start the fire. But tonight they found something they never had before. Peace. The first domino fell on a Thursday. A press leak not from Mara's team, but from an anonymous source. A whisper of embezzlement. Insider trading. The Valen name laced with scandal for the first time in 3 decades. Headlines flooded the finance world by morning. Valen legacy under siege, secrets, scandals, and silence. Nora stood by the window of their hotel suite, holding her phone, her face unreadable. It started. Mara sipped her coffee, eyes locked on the TV screen where talking heads speculated endlessly. Not by our hand. Someone's trying to beat us to it or cover their tracks. Mara grabbed her tablet, pulling up files. 2 of the board members just tendered their resignations. Good or bad? Good. Mara said they were loyal to him. If they're fleeing, it means they know the fire is real. And Serena, quiet. Too quiet. That's never a good sign. Mara looked at her. You don't have to keep doing this. Yes. Nora said. I do. It's dangerous. So is pretending everything's fine. Nora stepped closer, fingers curling into Mara's shirt. I married you, not just for the champagne and silk sheets. Mara, for this, the truth, the fight. You're not doing it alone. Mara kissed her forehead. Then we do it together. That afternoon, they returned to the city, back to the penthouse, back to the glass walls, and whispered threats. But something had changed. Nora no longer walked like a guest in Mara's world. She walked like she belonged there. The office was chaos. Phones ringing, PR in a spiral, lawyers working overtime. Mara entered like a storm wrapped in elegance, issuing orders with fire in her voice. And Nora, she sat in the conference room, combing through files, prepping statements, building timelines. The team glanced at her uncertainly at first, but by hour 3 they listened. The press will turn on us. Mara's publicist said. We'll lose investors. Maybe everything. Then let them, Nora said. This isn't about comfort. It's about truth. You're not trained for this, the woman snapped. She's trained in surviving, Mara said coldly. And right now, she's the sharpest mind in this room. Nora didn't flinch under the praise. She simply pointed to a name in the file. This man is the next link. He worked with your father 5 years ago on a hush money deal. If we expose him first, the others will scramble. Agreed, Mara said. Pull the files. Call the reporters. We go wide. By nightfall, #Valen Unmasked was trending worldwide. The empire Mara's father built was unraveling thread by thread. And Mara was holding the scissors, but the cost was coming. They felt it in the air. That night, they slept curled together in the middle of the giant bed, but neither truly slept. At 3:12 a.m., Mara's phone buzzed. She checked, froze. What? Nora whispered. Mara didn't speak. She just turned the screen. A photo. The 2 of them asleep. Taken from outside the window. A caption. You forgot who's watching. Nora's stomach flipped. We're being watched here. Mara moved instantly. Alarms. Security. Private teams sweeping the building. By sunrise, they'd found a hidden camera mounted in the balcony's awning. He's still playing, Mara said. Even after everything. Then we end the game. Nora said publicly completely. That day, Mara scheduled a live broadcast. No pre-briefs, no script, just her, a camera, and the world. Nora stood off screen, heart pounding, hand clenched into a fist. Mara looked straight into the lens. My name is Mara Vallon, and for years, I built an empire that looked perfect on the outside, but hid rot on the inside. My father's legacy was never clean, and it ends today. She exposed everything. Deals, threats, Serena, the bribes, even her own mistakes. Her voice never trembled. I fell in love with a woman who reminded me that silence is complicity. That love without honesty is control. So this is me choosing truth no matter the cost. The feed ended. The world erupted. Praise, outrage, shock. Investors panicked. Lawyers called, but one message broke through everything. A single private text sent to Nora's phone. You should have stayed broken. Mara saw it, took her hand. This ends now. Then let's finish it. They traced the number to a burner. And the burner led to a location. A private condo downtown. Serena's final hideout. Are we going? Nora asked. Yes, Mara said. But not alone. They brought security this time. Entered fast, silent, tactical. The condo was empty, clean, except for one thing. A folder on the kitchen counter. Inside, photos of Mara and Nora. Notes, schedules, a full dossier on Nora's life before Mara. She's been planning this for months, Mara said. But she's gone, Nora whispered. Why run now? Mara's eyes were sharp. Because the story is no longer hers to control. What do we do? Nora asked. We tell our story now, and we protect everything we've built. As they left the apartment, the sun rose over the city, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. The dossier haunted Nora long after they left the condo. Her life broken down into bullet points. Her childhood, her trauma, her habits, her patterns, her pain, every part of her catalogued like she was a threat to be neutralized. Mara sat beside her in the car, silent, jaw tight. They knew everything, Nora whispered. Before you even proposed, Mara, before I even knew who you really were. They underestimated you, Mara said. They thought knowing your pain would make you easier to control. They forgot who you became after it. I became yours. Mara reached over and laced their fingers together. And I'll never let them touch you again. Back at the penthouse, the war room came to life. The investigators, lawyers, and crisis managers flooded in. The Vallon board was fractured. Some members fled, others fought back. But Mara had the upper hand now. She didn't just have evidence. She had Nora. And for the first time, she used her wife's instincts, her emotional intelligence, her precision to turn the tide. Nora drafted the final statement to the press. She wrote every word herself. Every syllable felt like a reclaiming, not just of her name, but of her voice. Mara watched her work and thought, this is what power actually looks like. That same evening, Mara received a message from an encrypted account. One line, a location, a rooftop bar in the industrial district. The sender, Serena. Nora was by her side the moment she read it. She wants to meet, Mara said. It's a trap, Nora replied. Obviously, but we go anyway. Not without backup. No, Mara said, just us. Mara, this ends face to face. An hour later, dressed in black with adrenaline simmering in their blood, they arrived. The rooftop was empty except for one figure. Serena leaned against the railing, wind whipping her coat, her eyes wild but tired. You came, she said. You always loved dramatics, Mara replied. So did you. Serena turned toward Nora. You're quieter than I expected. I'm louder when I'm not being hunted. You weren't hunted. Serena said, voice low. You were studied. That's worse. Nora snapped. You invaded my life. I wanted to know what made her throw everything away. She didn't throw anything away, Nora said. She finally chose what mattered. She chose you. And I choose her 1,000 times over, Mara answered. So what now? Now? Serena's smile was sad. Nothing. I've already lost. Then why call us here? Nora asked. Because he's not finished, Serena said. Your father is moving funds, recruiting allies, setting you up as the traitor. Mara, he wants you erased, out of the company, off the name. Then he'll need to try harder, Mara said. He'll weaponize the press, Serena warned. Spin your marriage as weakness. Say manipulation, instability, whatever sticks. Let him, Nora said. The only unstable thing is his hold on power. He offered me immunity if I testified against you, Serena added. I didn't take it. Mara blinked. Why not? Because despite everything, you were the only one who ever really saw me. Maybe I hated how you left. I never stopped wanting you to win. Silence pressed in. The city glittered beyond the glass, indifferent. Serena stepped closer and held out a flash drive. This is the last piece, she said. Transfers. Names. Every off-book move from the past 6 months. Why give it to me? Mara asked. Because I'd burn it all down before I'd let that man win. What will you do now? Nora asked. Disappear, Serena said, a small, bleak smile. It's what I'm best at. She turned and left without looking back. Mara stood, frozen, the drive fisted in her hand. It's enough. To bury him? Nora asked. To bury everything. They didn't sleep. Back home, they built the final report, an unflinching exposé binding it all together: corruption, laundering, internal sabotage, witness intimidation. Mara wrote the executive summary herself. Nora added a last paragraph: let this be a reminder that even empires bleed when they are built on silence. They sent it to the Financial Crimes Division, the media, and the federal board. At sunrise, Mara poured 2 flutes of champagne. To the end? Nora asked. To the beginning, Mara said. They touched glasses, kissed. Nora laughed softly. What? Mara asked. I just realized, Nora said. I married you on a whim in a diner with greasy counters and flickering lights. And now? Mara asked. Nora's eyes shone. Now I'd marry you 1,000 times over. In every lifetime. In every chaos. Mara's smile was slow. Then let's survive this one first. 2 hours later, the headlines detonated. The financial world stalled. Valen Industries issued a public statement confirming Mara's father's complete removal. Investigations opened, assets froze, warrants followed, and in the center of it, Mara and Nora stood shoulder to shoulder, unbreakable. But one shadow remained, a final threat neither had seen. That night, a package arrived at the penthouse. No return address, no markings. Inside, a single object: Nora's wedding ring. The original, the one she'd left in a hotel drawer the night she ran from Tessa. Nora stared, shaking. And a note, handwritten. You still don't know everything. Mara stood behind her. What does it mean? Nora looked up slowly. I think someone else is still out there. Mara's voice was ice. Then we find them. Nora nodded. But this time, we're not just defending ourselves. We're going on the offensive. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Nora held the ring in her hand for a long time. She turned it over again and again, as if the gold could whisper answers. It couldn't. But the weight of it, the familiarity cut deeper than any threat so far. Because this wasn't strategy. This was personal. You left this in a drawer, Mara said softly. In a hotel you never told anyone about, not even me. Exactly. Nora replied. Whoever sent this, they were there. Then we've been looking in the wrong place, Mara murmured. We've been thinking like CEOs. But this isn't about business. It's about me. And suddenly the entire boardroom war, the empire, the corporate sabotage, it all shifted. What if Nora was never collateral? What if she had always been the target? Mara made calls, pulled records, surveillance from the hotel where Nora had stayed the night she ran from Tessa. Most footage was gone conveniently, but one frame survived. A woman in a dark coat entering the building 3 hours after Nora. No clear face, no name, but the posture, the tension. It wasn't Serena, it wasn't Tessa. Nora stared at the blurry figure. Her heart thudded in her ears. I know that walk, she said quietly. Morale looked at her. Who is it? Nora didn't answer at first. She walked to the window, heart clenching. I had a friend when I first started at the diner. Her name was Sloane. She was sweet, quiet, too quiet. I told her everything. My breakup, my fears. She listened like it was church. Mara stilled. And then she disappeared one day. No warning, quit the job, changed numbers. I thought maybe she left the city, but now Nora turned. Now I think she never left. I think she watched me walk into your world and decided to follow. Mara's mind was already racing. You think she sent the ring? Who else would have known I left it behind? Mara paced. If she's the one pulling strings, she's done it without touching anything corporate. No financial footprint, no tech trace. She's operating in the cracks. She's doing it emotionally, Nora said. Everything she sent has been designed to make me question you, to make us crack. She knows how to hurt you. She knows how to get to me. Mara nodded. Then it's time we stop reacting. We go find her. But how? Nora asked. She's a ghost. Then we find her like ghosts do by haunting the places she used to be. They returned to the diner. Nora hadn't stepped foot there since the morning Mara first appeared. Everything felt smaller. The manager blinked when he saw her. Didn't think we'd ever see you again. Do you remember Sloane? She asked. Of course. She left about a week after you. Did she say where she was going? Nah, but she came back once real quiet, sat in your section like she was waiting for someone when 2 months ago didn't order anything, just sat and stared at the door. Then she left a note. He pulled out a worn napkin from the drawer. On it, scribbled in sharp black ink. Do you think she loves you for who you are or for who she made you into? Nora felt Mara's hand find hers. That's obsession, Mara murmured. That's delusion and it's escalating. Mara turned to the manager. Did she say anything else? Only that she was watching, said love like that doesn't just disappear. Back at the penthouse, the security team ran every camera in a 5-block radius around the diner from that week. They found her. Sloane, hair now darker, body language the same. She exited the diner and walked toward a nearby building, an old apartment complex in the warehouse district. Mara didn't wait. Neither did Nora. They arrived just after sundown. Mara scanned the names on the buzzer. There was no Sloane, but one name stood out. Whitaker. Sloane's last name. Apartment 6C. They didn't bring security. Not this time. This wasn't about risk management. This was personal. Mara knocked. Silence. She knocked again, then a voice behind the door. You should have let me have her first. Nora froze. Mara's whole body tensed. Sloane. Nora said. Open the door. You're not here to talk. You're right. Mara said. We're here to end it. The door creaked open slowly. Sloane stood there unrecognizable and entirely the same. Her eyes were glassy, but her smile was sharp. You look happy, she said to Nora. I am. That must be hard knowing she has power, money, influence. You think she'd love you if you were still scraping tips. She loved me when I was broken, Nora said. And I love her for helping me rebuild. Sloane's eyes darkened. I waited for you. I listened. I stayed. You watched. You manipulated. I gave you space to grieve. You gave me reasons to run. Nora snapped. You never loved me. You loved owning me. Mara stepped forward. This ends now. Sloane tilted her head. So what? You're going to have me arrested? No. Mara said you're going to confess or we press charges for harassment, cyberstalking, and mail tampering, and I promise my legal team doesn't lose. Sloane's smile faltered. You think the law will protect you? No, Mara said, but it will bury you. For the first time, Sloane backed down. Her voice cracked. She was supposed to be mine. I was never yours, Nora said. I was trying to survive. And now I'm thriving. They left. Mara didn't look back. Nora didn't cry. That night, they filed the official report. Sloane disappeared the next day. No word, no threats, just silence. And in that silence, Mara and Nora finally exhaled. She was never the storm, Nora whispered. She was just the last shadow. Mara held her close, then let the light in. The silence lasted for days. No new packages, no new threats, no mysterious shadows lurking behind corners. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Mara and Nora woke up without fear. Nora sat by the window each morning, a mug of coffee warming her hands, Mara's robe wrapped around her shoulders. The city stretched beneath them, noisy and alive. But for once, it felt distant. Background music to a life finally coming into focus. Mara watched her from the kitchen one morning, heart thudding with a quiet ache. She'd built towers, led empires, silenced men twice her size in boardrooms, but nothing had ever terrified her more than the possibility of losing Nora. And yet somehow they'd survived together. What are you thinking? Nora asked, not turning from the window. That I don't deserve this. Then be grateful for it, Nora said. And keep choosing it every day. Mara crossed the room and knelt in front of her, resting her head against Nora's knee. You don't have to be strong right now, Nora whispered, stroking her hair. You can just be. You're not who I thought I needed, Mara murmured. You're more. Nora smiled soft and sad. And you're not who I feared you were. You're better. Their days shifted, slowed, no longer rushing from fire to fire. They spent mornings tangled in bed sheets, afternoons rebuilding Mara's public image piece by piece, and evenings laughing over wine like two women who'd finally remembered how to breathe. The media, once feral, began to turn. Mara's honesty, her raw vulnerability on camera, the proof of her father's crimes, it reshaped the story. Nora, once painted as a scandal, now became a symbol of truth, of resilience, of real love. Offers poured in: interviews, speaking engagements, a documentary proposal. Nora refused most of them. But there was one thing she didn't turn down. A letter from the youth center she once volunteered at before the diner job consumed her. They'd seen her story. They were rebuilding their mentorship program and they asked her to help lead it. You'd be amazing, Mara said, holding the letter between them. You think so? I know so. Do you ever think we weren't supposed to meet? Nora asked one night, curled into Mara's side on the rooftop. That it was all just too strange. Every day, Mara said. But then I remember, if you hadn't been abandoned, I wouldn't have found you. If Tessa hadn't broken you, I wouldn't have loved you this deep. If I hadn't taken that risk in the diner, then we'd both still be pretending. Mara kissed her. Slow, certain. You've changed me, and you made me braver. The next morning, Mara stood before the Valen board one last time. She handed over her final report, recommended new leadership, and formally stepped down as CEO. Gasps filled the room, but she didn't flinch. I built this company to prove I could. I'm leaving because now I don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. Nora was waiting for her outside, wearing jeans and a blazer, her hair in a messy bun, her smile brighter than the sun. So I'm free, Mara said. Nora held out her hand. Then come home. And Mara did. Not to a penthouse, not to marble and steel, but to her. Weeks passed. The final legal ties were cut. Her father's assets were seized. Serena vanished without a trace. Sloane was never heard from again. And in that soft space between the chaos and the calm, Mara did something she never thought she'd do again. She planned a future with Nora. One night, in a quiet garden surrounded by candles, she took out a velvet box and knelt. You already married me once, Mara said. But that wasn't for love. That was survival. This time I wanted to be for us. Nora's eyes filled with tears. You're asking me again? No. Mara whispered. I'm begging you to stay. Not because I need you to fix me, but because I can't imagine a life where you're not beside me when I finally feel whole. Nora dropped to her knees, kissed her, and whispered against her lips. Then let's do it right this time. The ring gleamed in the candlelight, but it was the woman who wore it that made it shine. The second wedding wasn't lavish. No press, no diamonds dripping from chandeliers. Just 20 people who mattered. One sun-wrenched rooftop and a love story that had already survived fire. Nora stood at the edge of the makeshift altar barefoot, hair soft around her shoulders, wearing a dress that clung like light. She looked like everything Mara had never believed she could have. And Mara wore a black suit cut perfectly to her body. No armor, no mask, just vulnerability dressed in elegance. When their eyes met, everyone else disappeared. You ready? Nora whispered, reaching for her hand. For the first time in my life, Mara breathed. The officiant smiled. We're gathered here. Not to begin something new, but to honor something that already survived more than most ever do. There were no traditional vows, just promises written in stolen moments, whispered in dark hotel rooms and over burned pancakes and beneath thousands of stars. Nora went first. I used to believe love was something you had to earn. That it came after you proved you could survive alone. But then you walked into my world, Mara Valen, and broke every rule I thought I needed. You didn't ask me to be strong all the time. You just stood beside me when I wasn't. And that changed everything. I don't want perfect. I want real. I want you in every version, every chaos, every silence. I choose you every time. Mara's eyes filled. She didn't look away. I spent most of my life proving I didn't need anyone, that I could outrun loneliness by building empires. But it wasn't until you, this messy, brave, infuriating woman, stepped into my world and refused to be intimidated that I realized something. I don't want a world I rule alone. I want one we build together. I want your honesty, your fury, your fire. I want your mornings and your grief, and your impossible hope. You don't complete me, Nora. You free me. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you always know exactly what that freedom is worth. They kissed. The kind of kiss that didn't feel like an end or a beginning. It felt like home. Cheers erupted. Champagne flowed. But all Mara saw was Nora's smile as the sun dipped behind her and turned the whole city gold. Later, when the rooftop had emptied and their hands were sore from dancing, Mara pulled Nora close, forehead to forehead. We did it, she whispered. No, Nora said. We chose it over and over again. And we'll keep choosing it. Mara laughed softly. You know what the press is going to say tomorrow? Disgraced CEO marries waitress after corporate collapse. Nora grinned. Let them. The truth is better. Broken women heal each other and redefine power. You want to write that? Already did for the mentorship blog. Went viral. Mara shook her head. Of course you did. A few days later, they flew out to a quiet coastal town. No paparazzi, no headlines, just sand, wind, and quiet. On the third night, Mara found Nora standing in the surf, eyes closed, hair blown wild by the ocean. What are you thinking? Mara asked. That this doesn't feel borrowed anymore. It feels ours. It always was. They stayed like that, wrapped in silence until Nora turned to her. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't walked into that diner every day? And I think fate isn't a straight line. It's a series of messy choices that lead us exactly where we belong. Nora stepped closer, touched Mara's face. Then I'm exactly where I belong, and Mara kissed her again, not with urgency, but with certainty, with a love that didn't need to scream to be heard. In the months that followed, Mara rebuilt, not a company, but a cause. She invested in women-led businesses, started a foundation with Nora, focused on trauma recovery and mentorship, and became the face of accountability in corporate reform. Nora led the mentorship program, spoke at conferences, shared her story not as a tragedy, but as proof that survival could bloom into joy. They traveled, they laughed, they made love in cities they couldn't pronounce. They argued about dish soap and redecorated 3 times because Nora hated marble. And one night, curled up on the couch with popcorn in their laps and Mara's head in Nora's lap, Nora looked down and said, "You're my favorite chapter." I thought I was the villain in your story, Mara teased. No. Nora said, you're the plot twist that saved the ending. Mara smiled, kissed her hand, and whispered. Then let's keep writing. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.